The alarm did not sound like a warning. It sounded like the end of something. I was standing in the communications bay of Meridian Station when the lights flickered red and every screen around me lit up with the same message, repeated in 12 languages none of us had asked to learn. Surrender your station. Lower your defenses. Prepare to be boarded. My name is Daniel Ashford, and 3 minutes earlier I had been drinking lukewarm coffee and complaining about a broken filter in the air recycling unit. Now I was staring at a wall of monitors showing 7 massive shapes dropping out of hyperspace above our small mining colony, blotting out the stars like a hand closing over a candle. Captain Laura Whitfield burst into the room, her boots slamming against the metal floor. She did not look at the screens. She looked at me. "Talk to me, Ashford. What are we dealing with?" "7 ships," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Each one is at least 4 times the size of anything we have. They are broadcasting on every frequency." "It is not a request, Captain. It is an order." She leaned over my shoulder and read the message herself. I watched her jaw tighten. Laura Whitfield was not a woman who scared easily. She had spent 15 years running supply routes through asteroid fields that had killed better pilots than her. But even she went quiet for a moment, staring at the ships hanging above us like judgment. "They call themselves the Austrian Dominion," said a voice behind us. Marcus Doyle, our chief engineer, walked in wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "I have heard of them. Traders talk. They have been expanding for 300 years. Nobody has ever said no to them and lived to tell the story." "There is a first time for everything," Laura said. The comms channel crackled again. This time, it was not a recording. A voice came through, smooth and layered, like something that had learned our language by listening to 1,000 hours of it, without ever needing to breathe while speaking. "Meridian Station. This is Fleet Commander Kaelrith Vantor, of the Austrian Dominion. Your colony sits on resources claimed by right of discovery. You have 30 minutes to comply. Resistance will not be tolerated. This is not a negotiation." I looked at Laura. She looked at the screen. Then she reached over and cut the channel herself. "Captain," I said carefully, "we have 42 people on this station. We have 3 defense turrets that were built to knock rocks out of our way, not to fight a war. We do not have a fleet. We do not have a military. We have miners and engineers and a handful of retired soldiers who came here to get away from fighting, not to find more of it." "I know exactly what we have, Ashford," she said. "I built half of it myself." "Then you know we cannot win this." She turned to face me, and there was something in her eyes that I had never seen on her before. It was not fear. It was something colder and steadier than fear. "We are not going to fight their war," she said. "We are going to fight ours." I did not understand what she meant. Not yet. None of us did. We were about to learn, along with the rest of the galaxy, that humanity did not know how to lose the way everyone expected us to. 26 minutes later, the deadline arrived. Nothing happened. No boarding parties. No warning shots. Just silence stretching across the black distance between their ships, and our small metal home spinning quietly around a dead moon. Then one of the 7 ships broke formation. "They are moving," said Ellie Sanders, our best pilot, watching from the secondary console. She had cropped brown hair and hands that never stopped moving, tapping against the console even when there was nothing to tap. "Captain, that ship is heading toward the eastern mining platform." "That is not the main station. That is Platform 7. We have 11 people stationed there." Laura's face went pale for exactly 1 second before it hardened again. "Get me a channel to Platform 7, she said. I tried. The static told me everything I needed to know before the screen confirmed it. Platform 7 had gone dark. "Captain," I said, my throat tight, "I am reading a weapons discharge from the Austrian ship. Platform 7's structural integrity has failed. I am not detecting any life signs." The room went silent. 11 people. Gone in less time than it had taken me to finish a sentence. The comms channel opened again on its own. Kaelrith Vantor's voice returned, calm and unbothered, as if he had simply adjusted the temperature in a room, rather than erased 11 lives. "That was a demonstration," he said. "The next one will not be so small. You have 5 minutes to reconsider your position." I looked around the room. Marcus Doyle had gone rigid, his hands frozen mid-motion, the rag hanging forgotten from his fingers. Ellie Sanders had stopped tapping. Even Laura Whitfield, who I had never once seen lose her composure, was breathing slowly through her nose, like she was holding something back that wanted very badly to come out. "Captain," I said quietly, "what do we do?" She did not answer right away. She walked to the main window instead, the one that looked out over the black expanse where 7 alien ships hung in perfect, arrogant silence, waiting for 42 frightened people to bow. "They think this is over," she said finally. "They think we are going to surrender, because we are small and they are large. They think size is the only thing that matters in a fight." She turned back to us. "They have never met humans before." I felt something shift in the room, a kind of electricity that had not been there a moment ago. Marcus straightened up. Ellie's hands found the console again, steadier this time. Even I felt my own fear folding itself into something else, something with edges. "Ashford," Laura said, "open a channel. I want to speak to Commander Vantor myself." I did as she asked. The alien's voice returned, smooth and expectant, clearly certain of what he was about to hear. "Meridian Station, have you reached a decision?" Laura Whitfield stepped up to the microphone, her voice flat and calm in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. "We have," she said. "Come and take it." The channel went dead. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Well," he said, "I suppose that settles that." Laura turned to the rest of us, and for the first time since the alarms had gone off, there was something almost like calm on her face. "Everyone listen to me carefully," she said. "We are not going to win this by matching their strength. We do not have their strength. We are going to win this by being something they have never had to plan for. Ashford, I need you to pull every piece of data we have on their ship designs, their weapon signatures, anything from the scans during their approach. Marcus, I want you in engineering figuring out what we can build with what we have. Ellie, I want flight paths mapped for every mining shuttle we own, and I want you thinking about them as more than just transport." "What are you planning, Captain?" I asked. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw not just a station commander, but someone who had grown up on stories about people who refused to kneel, no matter how tall the one standing over them happened to be. "They gave us a demonstration," she said. "Now we are going to give them one of our own." Outside, the 7 ships continued to drift in their perfect formation, patient and certain of their victory, completely unaware that the small, unimportant colony beneath them had just decided not to lose. I did not sleep that night, none of us did, but somewhere between the fear and the grief for the 11 people we had lost on Platform 7, something else began to grow in that station. It was quiet at first, barely noticeable, hidden behind exhausted eyes and shaking hands. But it was there, and it was spreading through every corridor of Meridian Station like a fuse, burning slowly towards something the galaxy had never seen coming. The Austrun Dominion had expected silence. They had expected surrender. What they got instead was the beginning of a very different kind of story, one that would end with alien commanders across a dozen systems learning a lesson they would never forget. Humans do not break. We adapt. And on that first terrible night, standing in a small station orbiting a dead moon, we began to adapt into something the galaxy was not ready for. By the time the sun, that was not really a sun, just the reflected glow of the dead moon's surface, crawled across the station windows again, Meridian Station had changed. Nobody had announced it, nobody had given a speech, but I could feel it in the way people moved through the corridors. Quicker now, quieter, focused in a way that mining colonies rarely were. I spent most of that first night buried in old scan data, pulling apart every signal we had captured from the Austrun ships during their approach. Marcus Doyle sat beside me in engineering, running the same numbers through different equations, muttering to himself the way he always did when a problem refused to give up its secrets easily. "Their shields work in layers," I said, pointing at a graph on my screen. 3 separate frequencies, rotating every few seconds. If you only hit them with one type of weapon, the layer that resists it simply takes over before you can do any real damage. Marcus leaned closer, his eyes narrowing at the pattern. That is a defense built for war between equals. Ships that fight the same way, use the same kind of weapons, follow the same kind of rules. Which means nobody has ever hit them with something they were not expecting, he said. They built a wall to stop swords. They never had to think about anything else. I sat back in my chair, turning that idea over. It was strange, hearing it out loud. The Austrian Dominion had spent 3 centuries expanding across the stars, and in all that time, apparently, they had never once encountered a species willing to fight outside of the rules everyone else seemed to agree on. Later that morning, Laura Whitfield gathered what remained of Meridian Station's leadership in the main briefing room. There were not many of us left in charge, not really. A mining colony does not need generals. But grief and fear have a way of turning ordinary people into something else very quickly. I want everyone to understand something, Laura said, standing at the head of the table. The Austrian Dominion has been doing this for a long time, conquering worlds, absorbing colonies, expanding their reach, and in all that time, it seems like nobody has ever said no to them in a way that actually meant something. Why would anyone? Asked Grace Bellamy, our station's chief scientist, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper memory for detail, when saying no gets you erased. Because most species do not have our history, Laura said. The room went quiet. I understood what she meant even before she explained it. Humanity had not arrived among the stars as a peaceful, unified people who had never known conflict. We had carried our entire complicated, painful history with us. The wars and the disasters and the long, hard lessons about what happens when someone decides they can simply take what they want by force. Every species out there fights according to rules, Grace continued, working through the idea out loud. Rituals, limits, agreed boundaries on how far a conflict is allowed to go before both sides back down. It works because everyone out there evolved into space together, more or less. They built those rules the same way you build a fence between neighboring farms. And we never had a seat at that table, Marcus said. We were not invited, Laura confirmed, which means we never agreed to their fence. I thought about that for a long moment, staring at the star charts on the wall, at the small red marker representing Meridian Station and the 7 larger markers hovering above it, each one representing a ship that had come here expecting an easy, quiet conquest. They think this is a ritual, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place in my mind. They think this is supposed to follow a pattern, a demonstration, a deadline, a surrender. That is how it has always worked for them. And we did not surrender, Ellie Sanders said from her seat near the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. No, Laura said, we did not. There was a strange kind of energy building in that room, something I had not expected to feel less than a full day after watching 11 people die on Platform 7. It was not hope exactly. It was closer to determination, the kind that grows out of grief when it has nowhere else to go. So what happens now, Grace asked, when they realize the rules do not apply to us? That, Laura said, is exactly what we need to figure out before they do. Over the following 2 days, Meridian Station transformed into something none of us had ever imagined it could become. Marcus and his engineering team began stripping mining equipment for parts, converting drilling lasers into weapons far more powerful than anything they had ever been designed for. Ellie spent hours in the shuttle bay, working with the other pilots to modify our small fleet of transport ships, installing improvised shielding pulled from cargo containers, adjusting engines to squeeze out speeds they were never built to reach. I spent most of my time listening. It turned out that the Austrian Dominion, confident in their assumed victory, had not bothered to encrypt most of their internal communications near our station. They simply had not seen the need. Why would a colony of miners possess the technology to intercept and translate an advanced alien language? They underestimated us in exactly the way Laura had predicted. Commander Vantor believes the delay is a stalling tactic, I reported during our next meeting, reading from the notes I had gathered. He believes we are attempting to negotiate through silence, hoping for better terms. His officers are debating whether to send a boarding party or wait for what he calls, quote, the inevitable request for mercy. They still think we are playing their game, Laura said. There is more, I added. Their fleet is not fully staffed for prolonged conflict. This was meant to be a quick acquisition. Most of their crew are administrators and support staff, not soldiers. They only have a small tactical unit aboard the lead ship, expecting to use it for intimidation, not for an actual fight. Marcus let out a low whistle. They came here expecting a surrender ceremony, not a war. Then let us make sure they get the second one, Laura said. That night, I could not stop thinking about the 11 people we had lost. I had known 2 of them personally, a married couple named Peter and Alice Marsh, who ran the hydroponics bay on Platform 7 and always saved the best tomatoes for the kids in the station school. I thought about how casually Commander Vantor had ended their lives, as if flipping a switch on a piece of equipment, rather than ending something that could never be replaced. Grief has a strange way of sharpening a person's focus. By the time morning came, I had stopped thinking about fear entirely. I only thought about what came next. Laura called another meeting, this time including every able-bodied person on the station who had volunteered to help. The briefing room was crowded now, full of miners and engineers, and the small handful of retired soldiers who had come to Meridian Station looking for peace, and instead found themselves standing at the edge of something enormous. I am not going to lie to any of you, Laura said, addressing the room. What we are about to attempt has never been done before, not against a fleet like this. We are not soldiers. Most of us signed up to dig ore out of asteroids, not to fight a war against beings who have never lost one, but they have made a mistake that is going to cost them everything. What mistake is that, Captain? Asked one of the retired soldiers, a quiet man named Nathan Voss, who had spent 20 years in planetary defense before retiring to what he thought would be a peaceful life among the stars. They assumed we would fight like everyone else they have ever conquered, Laura said. They assumed there were rules, limits, a ritual we would all follow because that is how it has always worked before. She paused, looking around the room at every tired, determined face. We are not going to follow their rules, she said. We are going to end this before it ever becomes the kind of war they are prepared for. Nathan Voss nodded slowly, something like recognition passing across his weathered face. You are talking about hitting them where they are not looking, before they finish setting up their siege. Exactly. That is not how the Dominion operates, I said. According to everything I have translated, their entire military doctrine is built around overwhelming force, delivered after a period of psychological pressure. They wait for fear to do most of the work before they ever need to act. Which means, Marcus said, catching on, they are not expecting anyone to act first. They have never had to worry about it, Laura confirmed. Every species they have encountered has played along with the pressure, the waiting, the slow crawl toward inevitable surrender. Nobody has ever simply refused to wait. I looked around the room and saw the same understanding dawning on every face. We were not going to win this fight by matching the Austrian Dominion's strength. We were going to win it by refusing to play the game they had spent 3 centuries perfecting. Ellie, Laura said, turning to our pilot, how many shuttles have you and your team modified? 6, Ellie answered, all fitted with improvised shielding and enough speed to outrun anything they might send after us, at least for a short burst. Marcus? The drilling lasers are ready, he said. They will not punch through their shields the way military-grade weapons would, but if we can find a way to hit the same point repeatedly before their layered defenses can rotate and adjust, we might be able to overload a section faster than they can compensate. And their tactical response time? Laura asked, looking at me. Slow, I said. Based on the communications I have intercepted, their command structure requires approval through at least 3 layers before any defensive maneuver can be authorized. They were built for intimidation, not for reacting to a genuine surprise. Laura nodded slowly, and I watched something settle into place behind her eyes, the shape of a plan finally coming together after 2 days of grief and fury and desperate, careful planning. "Then that is exactly what we are going to give them," she said, "a genuine surprise." The room fell silent, every person there understanding exactly what those words meant. We were no longer simply trying to survive. We were preparing to strike back, against a fleet that outnumbered and outgunned us in every measurable way, using nothing but speed, timing, and the simple, dangerous fact that nobody among the stars had ever expected humans to refuse to lose quietly. Outside the station windows, the 7 Austrian ships continued their patient wait, utterly unaware that the small, insignificant colony beneath them had already decided exactly how this story was going to end. Laura looked at each of us one final time before dismissing the room. "Get some rest if you can," she said. "Tomorrow, we stop waiting for them to decide our future." Nobody slept much that night. I certainly did not. I lay awake in my small quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Peter and Alice Marsh and their tomatoes, thinking about 11 people who would never see what came next. And somewhere beneath the grief, I felt something else beginning to grow, quiet and steady and absolutely certain. The Austrian Dominion had made their demonstration. Tomorrow it would be our turn. The plan Laura Whitfield laid out before dawn was simple in its shape and terrifying in its execution. We would not attack all 7 ships. We could not. Instead, we would strike the lead vessel, the one carrying Commander Kael'rith Vantor himself, using the 6 modified shuttles to approach from angles their sensors were not calibrated to expect, while Marcus and his engineering team overloaded a weak point in their shield rotation using the converted drilling lasers fired from the station's own defense turrets. Their shields rotate through 3 frequencies, Marcus explained one final time to the assembled pilots in the shuttle bay, holding up a data pad showing the pattern I had spent 2 sleepless nights decoding. If we hit the same coordinates the moment the resistant frequency shifts away, before the next one fully engages, we create a window. It will not last long, maybe 4 seconds, but it will be enough. Enough for what? Asked one of the younger pilots, a nervous man named Colin Baxter, who had been driving ore haulers for Meridian Station since he was 18. Enough for Ellie's team to get close enough to disable their primary weapons array from the outside, Marcus said, and enough for the rest of us to make sure they cannot chase us afterward. I sat at my station in the communications bay, watching the countdown timer Laura had set for the operation, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. My job was simple but essential. I would monitor every frequency the Austrian fleet used, feeding real-time translations to Laura so she could adjust the plan the moment anything shifted. "Ashford," Laura said over the comm, her voice calm in the way that only comes from someone who has already accepted every possible outcome, status on their communications. "Quiet," I said. "Commander Vantor's officers are still debating whether to send a boarding party. They believe we are simply too frightened to respond. There is no indication they suspect anything is coming." "Good," she said. "Let us keep it that way for as long as possible." At exactly 0400 station time, the 6 modified shuttles launched from Meridian Station's hidden bay on the dark side of the colony, engines running at the barest whisper of power to avoid detection. Ellie Sanders led the formation herself, guiding her small ship through a wide, looping path that would bring them up beneath the lead Austrian vessel from an angle their sensor arrays were simply not designed to monitor closely. "They are built to watch for threats approaching from open space," Ellie had explained during the final briefing, tracing the path on the star chart with her finger. "Big, obvious threats. Nobody expects 6 unarmed cargo shuttles to matter at all, which is exactly why nobody is watching the blind spot directly beneath their own hull." I listened to the mission unfold through a mixture of calm chatter and the steady stream of Austrian communications I continued to translate in real time. For the first 11 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as Laura had planned. The shuttles moved silently through the dark, hidden by the shadow of the dead moon, closing the distance toward the lead ship without triggering a single alarm. "Ashford," Laura said quietly. "Anything?" "Still nothing," I confirmed. "They have no idea we are moving." I could hear the tension in her breathing even through the calm, the sound of someone holding an entire station's worth of hope in the space behind her ribs. Then, 12 minutes into the operation, everything changed. "Captain," I said, my voice sharpening, "I am picking up a shift in their patrol pattern. One of the support vessels is moving away from formation. I do not think this is related to us, but it is heading directly across Ellie's projected flight path." "How long until intercept?" 90 seconds, I said, my heart climbing into my throat. "Ellie," Laura said immediately, "you have company. Support vessel moving into your path, 90 seconds and closing." "Copy that." Ellie's voice came back, tight but controlled. "Adjusting course now." I watched the tracking data update in real time as Ellie guided her formation into a sharper turn, threading the 6 shuttles through a narrower gap in the darkness, buying just enough distance to avoid the crossing patrol vessel. My hands were shaking slightly as I typed, but my voice stayed level because I understood that Laura and Ellie needed calm information, not shared panic. "They passed within 400 meters, I reported, watching the numbers settle. "No detection. They are continuing on their original patrol route." I heard Marcus exhale sharply over the comm from his position at the station's defense controls. That was too close. "Focus," Laura said. "We are not done yet." The 6 shuttles reached their final position 18 minutes after launch, hovering silently in the massive blind spot directly beneath the lead Austrian vessel's main hull. Through the station's remaining sensors, I watched Ellie's team begin the delicate work of attaching improvised charges to the outer plating surrounding the ship's primary weapons array, working in the vacuum with a precision that made my chest ache with pride and fear in equal measure. "Charges set," Ellie reported eventually, her voice steady despite the obvious strain. "Ready on your mark, Captain." Laura turned to Marcus, standing beside the main defense console in the station's control room, his hands hovering over the firing controls for the converted drilling lasers. "Marcus, talk to me about that shield window." "Their rotation cycle is holding steady," Marcus said, watching his own screens intently. "Next gap opens in exactly 40 seconds. Laura took a slow breath, and I found myself holding mine along with her, watching the countdown tick steadily downward on my own display. "Ellie," Laura said, "on my signal, get your team clear. As soon as you are at a safe distance, we detonate the charges, and Marcus fires through the shield gap at the same moment. We want them dealing with 2 problems at once, from 2 directions, before they even understand what is happening." "Understood," Ellie said, standing by. The final 40 seconds felt like the longest stretch of time I had ever experienced. I sat frozen at my console, watching the shield rotation data tick closer to its gap, listening to the quiet, tense breathing of everyone connected to the operation across a dozen different channels. 10 seconds, Marcus said. I watched the numbers fall. 9, 8, 7. "Ellie, clear the area now," Laura said. "Moving," Ellie confirmed, and I watched the 6 shuttle signatures on my screen begin pulling away from the lead ship's hull at maximum safe speed. 5 seconds, 4, 3. "Fire," Laura said. 2 things happened at once. Marcus fired the converted drilling lasers from Meridian Station's defense turrets, the beams cutting across the dark distance and striking the exact coordinates on the Austrian ship's hull at the precise moment its shield rotation left that section undefended. Simultaneously, the charges Ellie's team had planted detonated against the outer plating surrounding the primary weapons array, tearing a section of the hull open in a silent, brilliant flash of light that lit up my monitor for a fraction of a second before the automatic filters dimmed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every alarm on the Austrian fleet's communications channels erupted at once, a chaotic flood of voices shouting over each other in a language I had spent 2 days learning to translate, none of it calm, None of it controlled, none of it anything like the confident, patient tone Commander Vantor had used when he first addressed our station. "Captain," I said, unable to keep the disbelief out of my own voice, "their weapons array is offline. I am reading significant damage to the lead ship's primary systems. They did not see it coming." I heard something in the control room that I had not expected to hear that night. Laura Whitfield laughed, short and sharp, and full of a fierce, exhausted joy. "Ellie, get your people home," she said. "Marcus, keep that turret ready, in case they try to retaliate, before they figure out what just happened." "Copy that, Captain," Ellie said, and I could hear the same disbelieving relief in her voice that I felt sitting in my own chair. The 6 shuttles raced back toward Meridian Station under full power now, no longer concerned with stealth, simply focused on putting distance between themselves and a fleet that had just been forced to understand something it had never had to consider before. I kept monitoring the Ostrun communications as the chaos aboard the lead vessel continued to unfold. Officers shouting damage reports, someone demanding to know how a colony of unarmed miners had managed to disable a portion of their most heavily defended ship without triggering a single warning. And beneath all of it, a single voice, quieter than the rest, but carrying a weight that silenced everyone around it. Commander Kaelrith Vantor. "Silence," he said, and the chaos on the channel dropped away almost instantly. "Report the damage." "Now." I translated his words as quickly as I could, feeding them to Laura in real time. "Primary weapons array is offline," I said, relaying the information as it came through. "Structural damage to the outer hull in the affected section. No casualties reported yet, but they are still assessing." "How?" Vantor's voice demanded, and even through the alien inflection, I could hear something in his tone that had not been there before, something that sounded almost like disbelief. One of his officers responded, and I translated the words carefully, making sure I understood the meaning before I passed them along. "He is saying the attack came from 2 directions simultaneously," I reported. "External charges and a coordinated weapons strike timed to exploit the shield rotation gap. He believes it required detailed knowledge of our shield frequency pattern, which should have been impossible for a species with no prior contact with Ostrun technology." There was a long pause on the alien channel. When Vantor spoke again, his voice had changed. The smooth, confident certainty was gone, replaced by something colder and far more careful. "They were listening to us," he said. "They understood our communications." "He knows," I said quietly to Laura. "He knows we intercepted their signals." "Let him know," Laura said. "Let him understand exactly what he is dealing with now." The 6 shuttles docked safely back at Meridian Station 11 minutes later, and I watched through the station's cameras as exhausted, adrenaline-filled pilots climbed out of their modified cargo ships, greeted by cheers and relieved embraces from the rest of the colony. Ellie Sanders walked through the crowd with a wide, exhausted grin on her face, accepting a tight hug from Marcus Doyle before making her way toward the control room to report directly to Laura. But the celebration did not last long. 10 minutes after the shuttles docked, the Ostrun communications channel erupted again, and this time it was Commander Vantor himself speaking directly, his voice carrying a fury that had replaced every trace of his earlier calm confidence. "Meridian Station," he said, "you have made a grave mistake. I do not know how you accomplished what you did tonight, but I assure you it will not happen again. I am recalling my remaining ships into a defensive formation, and I am requesting reinforcements from the nearest Dominion fleet. When they arrive, there will be no more demonstrations. There will only be an ending." I translated his words to Laura as fast as I could manage, watching her face carefully as she absorbed the threat. "How long until reinforcements could arrive?" she asked. I ran the numbers based on everything I had learned about Ostrun fleet movements over the past 2 days. Based on the nearest staging point I have identified in their communications, I would estimate somewhere between 4 and 6 days. Laura was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star chart on the wall, at the 7 ships now pulling into a tighter, more defensive formation above our small colony. "Then we have 4 to 6 days," she said finally, to figure out how to survive what comes next. I felt the weight of those words settle over the room. We had won something tonight, a small, impossible victory against a fleet that had never expected resistance. But Commander Vantor's fury told me something important, something I would carry with me through everything that followed in the days ahead. We had not ended this fight. We had only just begun it, and the galaxy that had never expected humans to retaliate was about to discover exactly how far we were willing to go to defend what belonged to us. Marcus walked over and put a hand on my shoulder, his face tired but steady. "You did good work tonight, Ashford." "We all did," I said, though my mind was already racing forward, toward the days ahead, toward reinforcements and retaliation and everything that Commander Vantor's fury promised was coming. Laura turned to address the exhausted, celebrating crowd gathered in the control room, and though her voice was steady, I could see in her eyes that she understood exactly what kind of storm we had just invited toward our small, stubborn colony. "Everyone, listen to me," she said. "Tonight, we proved something important. We proved that we are not going to kneel simply because we are smaller, but this is not over. They are calling for reinforcements, and when those ships arrive, we are going to need every single one of us ready for what comes next." The room fell quiet, the earlier celebration tempering into something more determined, more focused. I looked around at the tired, hopeful faces of the people I had lived alongside for years, people who had come to Meridian Station looking for nothing more than honest work among the stars, and I understood that we were no longer simply miners and engineers and pilots. We had become something else entirely, something the Austrian Dominion had never encountered in 3 centuries of quiet, easy conquest. We had become a problem they could not simply wait out. And somewhere in the dark distance beyond our station, Commander Kael'rith Vantor was already preparing for a war he did not yet understand he could not win, against a species that had just taught the galaxy its very first, painful lesson about what happens when you push humanity too far. It would not be the last lesson we taught them. The 4 days that followed our first strike against the Austrian fleet passed in a blur of exhausted preparation, and I quickly learned that victory, even a small one, carries its own kind of weight. We had won a single skirmish. We had not won a war, and Commander Vantor's promised reinforcements were already crossing the distance toward Meridian Station, carrying with them a force far larger than anything we had faced before. Laura Whitfield did not waste a single hour of those 4 days. She had Marcus Doyle and his engineering team working around the clock, converting every piece of mining equipment we owned into something that could be used to defend our home. Drilling lasers became weapons. Cargo shuttles became makeshift fighters. Even the massive ore processing magnets, originally designed to sort metal from stone, were reconfigured under Marcus's careful direction into devices capable of disrupting the delicate shield systems the Austrian Dominion relied on so heavily. "We cannot outgun them," Marcus explained during one of our late-night planning sessions, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion, but sharp with focus. "Even with everything we have built, their reinforcements will outnumber us badly. Our only advantage is that they still do not understand how we think." "Then we make sure that advantage lasts as long as possible," Laura said. "I spent those 4 days buried in the communications bay, monitoring every signal I could intercept from the retreating Austrian fleet as they waited above us for their reinforcements to arrive." Commander Vantor had grown more cautious since our first strike, tightening his communications protocols, but he had not entirely given up his habit of underestimating us. "They are treating our attack as an anomaly," I reported to Laura during one meeting, sharing the latest intercepted transmissions. "Vantor believes we had outside help, some other species providing us with tactical support. He does not believe a colony of miners could have planned and executed that strike on our own." "Let him believe whatever helps him sleep at night," Laura said grimly. "As long as he keeps underestimating us, we keep our advantage." But not everything about those 4 days was preparation and cautious hope. On the second night, Nathan Voss, the retired soldier who had spent 20 years in planetary defense before coming to Meridian Station for a quieter life, gathered a small group of volunteers to begin training the rest of the colony in basic defensive tactics. I watched from the observation deck as miners and engineers, people who had never held a weapon with the intention of using it against another living being, practiced formations and communication drills under Nathan's patient, steady guidance. Grace Bellamy approached me during one of these training sessions, her arms crossed, watching the same scene with an expression I could not quite read. "Do you ever think about what we are becoming?" she asked quietly. I considered the question carefully before answering. "I think about it every day." "We came here to build something," she said. "A home, a community. Now we are turning ourselves into a fortress." "We did not choose this fight, Grace," I said. "They brought it to our door and killed 11 people before we ever had a chance to respond. I do not know what that makes us now, but I know what it would have made us if we had simply surrendered." She was quiet for a long moment, watching Nathan correct a young miner's stance, patiently, without judgment. "You are right," she finally said. "I just wish it did not have to be this way." "So do I admitted. On the third day, something happened that none of us had expected. I was monitoring the usual frequencies when a new signal appeared, weaker and more distant than the Ostrun transmissions, carrying an encryption pattern I did not recognize. "Captain," I said, calling Laura into the communications bay immediately, "I am picking up an unfamiliar signal. It is not Ostrun. The encryption is completely different from anything I have cataloged." Laura leaned over my shoulder, studying the readout. "Can you decode it?" "I am trying," I said, running the signal through every translation protocol we had available. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful work before the message finally resolved into something readable, and when it did, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Captain," I said slowly, "this is addressed directly to Meridian Station." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Read it to me." I cleared my throat and read the translated message aloud. "To the humans of Meridian Station. We have observed your resistance against the Ostrun Dominion with great interest. Our people have suffered under their expansion for many years, forced into compliance by threats we could never overcome alone. Your actions have shown us something we believed was no longer possible. We do not offer military support, as our own resources are limited, but we offer information, and the promise of future cooperation should you survive what comes next. Signed, the Free Assembly of Corvain." The room went silent. Laura read the message again over my shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Who are the Corvain?" she asked. I pulled up what limited information I had gathered from the Ostrun communications over the past several days. Based on references I have intercepted, they are a species located roughly 2 systems away from here. They were absorbed into the Ostrun Dominion's territory nearly a century ago. From what I can tell, they are treated as a subject population, not full citizens of the Dominion. "And now they are reaching out to us," Marcus said, having joined us partway through the conversation, "because we did something they never managed to do themselves." "We resisted," Laura said quietly. I felt something shift in the room again, similar to the electricity I had felt on that first terrible night, but different this time. Less fear, more possibility. "Reply to them," Laura said. "Thank them for reaching out. Ask them what kind of information they are willing to share." I spent the rest of that day and much of the night composing careful, cautious communications with the Free Assembly of Corvain, learning everything I could about the Ostrun Dominion's fleet capabilities, their command structure, their history of expansion across dozens of systems. What I learned painted a picture far larger and more troubling than I had imagined during those first chaotic hours after their arrival. The Ostrun Dominion had conquered no fewer than 17 inhabited systems over the past 3 centuries, each conquest following the same pattern we had witnessed ourselves. A demonstration of force, a deadline, and an expectation of quiet, orderly surrender. In every single case, according to the Corvain records, the target species had complied. Until us. "We are the first," I told Laura and the rest of the leadership during our next meeting, sharing everything I had learned. "In 300 years, no species has ever refused the Ostrun Dominion's demands and survived long enough to matter. Which means," Nathan Voss said grimly, when their reinforcements arrive, they are not just coming to punish us. They are coming to make an example of us, loudly enough that nobody else in this region ever considers resisting again. Thequelt. The weight of that realization settled over the room like a physical thing. We were no longer simply fighting for our own survival. We had become a symbol, whether we wanted to be one or not, for every species living under the shadow of the Austrun Dominion's expansion. How long until their reinforcements arrive? Grace asked. I checked the latest data I had gathered. Based on fleet movement patterns the Corvain shared with us, I estimate we have less than 48 hours. The room fell into tense, focused silence. Laura stood at the head of the table, studying the star charts one final time before speaking. Then we use every hour we have left, she said. Marcus, I want every weapon system we have built, tested, and ready. Nathan, continue training every volunteer you can. Ashford, keep working with the Corvain. If they have any information about Austrun reinforcement fleet capabilities, I want to know everything before those ships arrive. Over the following day and a half, Meridian Station transformed once again, this time into something that felt less like a mining colony bracing for disaster, and more like a fortress preparing for a siege it intended to survive. Every able-bodied person on the station found a role to play, whether it was reinforcing structural weak points, learning basic defensive maneuvers under Nathan's patient guidance, or assisting Marcus's engineering team in the final preparations of our modified weapons. I continued my exchanges with the Free Assembly of Corvain throughout, learning as much as I could about what we would soon be facing. The information they provided was invaluable. Detailed schematics of Austrun reinforcement vessels, weapon capabilities, even insights into their command psychology that helped me understand exactly how rigid and predictable their military doctrine truly was. They have never had to improvise, I explained to Laura during one of our final planning sessions before the reinforcements were due to arrive. Every conquest they have ever conducted followed the same pattern, which means their entire command structure is built around that pattern. Orders flow from the top down through very specific channels. Officers are not given room to make independent decisions in the field. Which means if we can disrupt their communication with command, Laura said slowly, following the thread of the idea, their officers will not know how to respond without waiting for approval they cannot get. Exactly, I said. Marcus, who had been listening quietly from the corner of the room, looked up with something sparking behind his tired eyes. I might be able to build something for that. A jamming device, powerful enough to disrupt their communication frequencies during the critical moments of an engagement. How long would you need? Laura asked. With the parts we have available, Marcus said, already calculating in his head, maybe 18 hours. You have 16, Laura said. Their reinforcements are due to arrive before then. Marcus did not argue. He simply nodded and left the room immediately, already shouting orders to his engineering team as he went. That night, as the station buzzed with the quiet, urgent energy of final preparations, I found myself standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the dark expanse where the original 7 Austrun ships still hovered in their defensive formation, waiting for reinforcements that would soon arrive and change everything. Laura joined me there, her own exhaustion evident in the slight slump of her shoulders, though her eyes remained sharp and focused as ever. You have not slept much these past 4 days, she said. Neither have you, I replied. She managed a tired smile. Fair enough. We stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars, watching the alien ships that had brought so much grief and change to our small colony in such a short amount of time. Do you think we can survive what is coming? I asked finally, giving voice to the question that had been sitting heavily in my chest for hours. Laura considered the question carefully before answering. I do not know, she admitted, but I know we are not the same people we were 4 days ago. We have already done something the Corvains say has never been done in 300 years. Whatever happens next, we are not walking into it the way they expect. I thought about Peter and Alice Marsh, about the 11 people we had lost on Platform 7, about everything that had changed in the span of less than a week. And I thought about the message from the Free Assembly of Corvain, about the quiet hope buried in their careful, cautious words. They are watching us, I said, not just the Ostrun, everyone under their control, everyone who has been waiting for someone, anyone, to show them it is possible to say no. Laura nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the distant stars. Then we had better make sure we give them a reason to keep believing that. Somewhere beyond the edge of the star system, the Ostrun Dominion's reinforcement fleet was closing the distance toward Meridian Station, carrying with it the full weight of 3 centuries of unbroken conquest. And standing on that quiet observation deck, exhausted but unbroken, I understood that whatever came next would not just determine the fate of our small colony. It would determine whether the rest of the galaxy ever believed resistance was possible again. The reinforcements arrived 11 hours earlier than the Corvain's estimate had predicted, and I will never forget the sound that filled the communications bay when my sensors first registered them dropping out of hyperspace. It was not an alarm this time. It was something worse, a long, steady tone that meant the numbers on my screen were too large to process as anything except what they were. "Captain," I said, my voice tight, "I am reading 18 additional vessels. They are significantly larger than the original 7. I am reading weapon signatures I have never cataloged before." Laura arrived in the communications bay within seconds, her expression calm despite the storm building behind her eyes as she studied the readout over my shoulder. "Talk to me, Ashford." 18 ships, I repeated. "Combined with the original 7, we are looking at 25 vessels total. Based on the signatures, at least 6 of the new arrivals appear to be dedicated warships, built for actual combat rather than intimidation." Marcus Doyle burst into the room moments later, wiping his hands on the same worn rag he always carried, his eyes immediately going to the star chart display. "That is not a punishment fleet," he said quietly. "That is an extermination fleet." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of that realization settling over all of us, like a physical pressure. We had spent 4 days preparing everything we possibly could, converting our small colony into something capable of fighting back. But 25 ships, several of them built for genuine warfare, represented a force far beyond anything we had imagined facing. "Say, Ashford," Laura said, her voice steady despite everything. "What is Vantor saying?" I turned my attention back to the intercepted Ostrun communications, translating as quickly as I could manage. He is addressing the reinforcement commander directly, a ship captain named Threll Marchand. Vantor is briefing her on our previous strike, warning her not to underestimate us. "Small comfort," Marcus muttered. "There is more," I said, continuing to listen. "Marchand does not appear convinced. She is telling Vantor that a colony of unarmed miners could not possibly have caused the damage his ship sustained without outside assistance. She believes his account is exaggerated." Laura's expression shifted slightly at that, something calculating passing behind her tired eyes. "She is underestimating us even more than Vantor did." "It would seem so," I confirmed. "Then that is exactly the mistake we are going to use," Laura said. Over the following hour, the 25-ship Ostrun fleet arranged itself into a formation above Meridian Station, and I watched with a growing knot of dread as their combined weapon systems came online, filling my sensor readouts with more hostile signatures than I had ever seen in my life. Somewhere among that overwhelming display of force, Commander Vantor and Captain Marchand were preparing to finish what had begun less than a week earlier, when 11 innocent people lost their lives on Platform 7 simply for existing in a place the Ostrun Dominion had decided they wanted. Laura called every remaining member of Meridian Station's leadership into the control room for what would become our final planning session before the battle none of us could avoid any longer. "We cannot win a direct confrontation against that fleet," she said plainly, not bothering to soften the truth. 25 ships, 6 of them genuine warships, against our converted mining equipment and 6 modified shuttles. If this becomes a straightforward fight, we lose. "Then we do not let it become a straightforward fight," Nathan Voss said, his years of military experience showing clearly in the steady confidence of his voice. "Marcus," Laura said, turning to her engineer, "the jamming device, is it ready?" "Just finished the final calibrations 2 hours ago," Marcus confirmed. "It will disrupt their command communications within a radius covering the entire fleet, but only for a limited window. Once they realize what is happening, they will likely fall back on standard tactical protocols to compensate." "How long is the window?" 6 minutes, Marcus said. "Maybe 7 if we are fortunate." Laura absorbed this information, her mind clearly working through every possible angle of the plan taking shape. 7 minutes without central command, coordinating 25 ships, she said slowly. That means every individual captain has to make their own decisions without approval from above. "And based on everything the Corvain told us about their rigid command structure," I added, "most of those captains have never had to operate without that structure. They will hesitate. They will wait for orders that are not coming." "Confusion," Laura said. 7 minutes of confusion against a fleet that has never once had to think for itself. "It is not much," Nathan warned, "but against a force this size, confusion might be the only real advantage we have left." Ellie Sanders, who had been quiet through most of the discussion, finally spoke up from her position near the star chart. "What do we do with those 7 minutes, Captain?" Laura studied the display for a long moment before answering, and I watched her trace a path across the chart with her finger, the same careful, calculating expression she had worn before our first successful strike against the lead Austrian ship. "We do not attack their strongest ships," she said. "We go after Threl Marchand's command vessel directly. If we can disable her ship specifically, during the exact window when nobody else in that fleet can receive orders from Central Command, we create a leadership vacuum at the worst possible moment for them." "Cut off the head," Marcus said, understanding immediately. "Exactly." The plan that emerged over the following 2 hours was more dangerous than anything we had attempted during our first strike, and everyone in that room understood the risks involved. Ellie would lead the 6 modified shuttles once again, this time carrying a larger, more powerful version of the improvised charges used in our previous attack, directly toward Marchand's flagship during the 7-minute communications blackout Marcus's jamming device would create. Meanwhile, every remaining defense turret on Meridian Station, converted drilling lasers and all, would provide covering fire, targeting the flagship's shield generators to create the openings Ellie's team would need to get close enough to strike. "This is not going to be like last time," Laura said, addressing the room one final time before the operation began. "Last time, we had the advantage of complete surprise. This time, they know what we are capable of. Every person involved in this operation needs to understand that the risk is significant." I watched Ellie Sanders nod without hesitation, her jaw set with the same fierce determination I had seen in her eyes since the very beginning. "We are ready, Captain." Nathan Voss's volunteer defense teams took their positions throughout the station, prepared to protect Meridian Station's core systems in case the Austrian fleet attempted a direct assault during the confusion. Marcus returned to engineering to make final preparations on the jamming device, while I remained at my station in the communications bay, monitoring every frequency for any sign that the Austrian fleet suspected what was coming. At exactly 0200 station time, 4 hours after the reinforcement fleet's arrival, Laura gave the order to begin. "Marcus," she said over the comm, "activate the jamming device." "Activating now," Marcus confirmed. I watched my communications readouts erupt into chaos as the device came online, scrambling every frequency the Austrian fleet relied on for coordinated command. Within seconds, the confident, organized chatter I had been monitoring for hours dissolved into fragmented, confused static, individual ships suddenly cut off from the central command structure they had never needed to function without. "Window is open," Marcus reported. 7 minutes, starting now." "Ellie, go," Laura said. The 6 modified shuttles launched immediately, racing through the darkness toward Threl Marchand's flagship at a speed that made my chest tighten with anxious hope. I watched their signatures move across my display, weaving through gaps in the Austrian formation that had suddenly, chaotically lost the coordination that had made them so intimidating just minutes earlier. "Captain," I reported, tracking every scrap of information I could gather. "Individual ships are attempting independent maneuvers, but without central coordination, their formation is beginning to fragment. I am seeing at least 3 vessels moving in directions that conflict with standard defensive protocol. They do not know what to do without someone telling them," Nathan said, a grim satisfaction evident in his voice. Marcus's defense turrets opened fire the moment Ellie's shuttles came within range of Marchand's flagship, the converted drilling lasers striking the same layered shield pattern we had exploited during our first attack, only this time aimed at a much larger, better defended vessel. I watched anxiously as the shields absorbed strike after strike, slowly weakening under the sustained assault. "Shield integrity dropping," I reported, watching the data stream in from every source we had available. "They are down to 60% and falling." "Ellie, how close are you?" Laura asked. 90 seconds from the hull," Ellie's voice came back, tight with concentration. I watched the countdown on my screen, watched the shuttle formation weaving through the chaotic, fragmenting Ostrun defense, and felt my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. 4 minutes remained in Marcus's jamming window. 4 minutes before the confusion cleared and Marchand's fleet remembered how to fight as a coordinated force again. "Shields at 30%, I reported. "Almost there," Ellie said. Then something went wrong. "Captain," I said, my stomach dropping as new data appeared on my screen. "One of the support vessels has broken away from the confused formation and is moving directly into Ellie's flight path. I do not think this is a coordinated response. I believe the individual captain is simply panicking and reacting without orders." "Ellie, you have an unexpected contact," Laura warned immediately. "Moving into your path." "I see it," Ellie said, her voice sharp with focus. Adjusting course. I watched in tense silence as Ellie guided her formation through a desperate, sharp maneuver, narrowly avoiding a collision that would have ended the entire operation in an instant. But the adjustment cost precious seconds, seconds we could not afford to lose. 2 minutes remaining in the window, Marcus warned. "Ellie, status," Laura demanded. "Charges are set," Ellie reported, her voice strained but steady. "Detonating now." I watched the sensor readout capture the moment the charges detonated against Marchand's weakened hull, tearing through the compromised section with enough force to disable the flagship's primary systems entirely. For a moment, the Ostrun fleet's confusion deepened even further, as the one ship that might have restored order to their scattered formation suddenly went dark, its own communications and command systems shattered by the strike. "Direct hit," I confirmed, relief flooding through my voice despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of me. "Flagship is disabled. I am reading no immediate threat to the shuttle formation." "Ellie, get your people home," Laura said, "now." The 6 shuttles turned back toward Meridian Station at maximum speed, racing through the last remaining moments of Marcus's jamming window before the Ostrun fleet's communications would begin to clear. I watched, breath held, as they crossed the distance safely, docking within the station's protective bay, just as the jamming effect finally faded and the fleet above us erupted into a fresh wave of frantic, disorganized communication. "Captain," I said, monitoring the chaos unfolding across the Ostrun channels, "they have realized their flagship is disabled. Commander Vantor is attempting to assume emergency command of the fleet, but the remaining captains are hesitant to follow orders from a ship that was not originally designated as the command vessel." "How hesitant?" Laura asked. I listened carefully to the fragmented, uncertain communications flooding the channel, translating as quickly as I could. Several captains are questioning the chain of command. Without clear authorization from their original leadership structure, they do not know who is actually in charge anymore. Nathan Voss let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Their entire fleet just froze because nobody told them who gets to give the orders. "That will not last forever," Laura warned, though I could hear the cautious hope beginning to creep into her own voice. "But it might last long enough." Over the following hour, I watched the Austrian Dominion's massive reinforcement fleet struggle to reorganize itself, hampered by a command structure that had simply never been designed to function during genuine chaos. Individual captains made cautious, uncertain decisions, unwilling to commit to any significant action without proper authorization, while Commander Vantor worked desperately to re-establish control over ships that no longer trusted a chain of command that had failed them so completely and so publicly. It was during this window of uncertainty that the second message from the Free Assembly of Corvain arrived, and this time it was not alone. I sat in stunned silence as 3 more encrypted signals appeared on my display, each one carrying a different species designation I recognized from the information Corvain had shared with us earlier. "Captain," I said, calling Laura back into the communications bay, "I am receiving multiple new signals. Corvain and 3 others. I believe these are other species who have suffered under Austrian expansion." Laura leaned over my shoulder, watching the signals resolve into readable messages one by one. Each carried a similar sentiment, careful and cautious, but unmistakably hopeful. They had watched our resistance. They had watched the confusion currently unfolding above our small colony. And for the first time in generations, according to their own words, they were beginning to believe that the Austrian Dominion's control over their region of space was not as absolute as they had always been told. "They are asking if we would be willing to coordinate," I said, translating the final message carefully. "Not immediately, not for this battle, but for what comes after, if we survive it." Laura was quiet for a long moment, staring at the messages, at the star chart showing the still confused, still fragmented Austrian fleet hovering above Meridian Station. "Reply to all of them," she said finally. "Tell them we are still here. Tell them we intend to stay that way." Commander Vantor's voice returned to the main channel 3 hours later, and I recognized immediately that something fundamental had shifted in his tone since our very first encounter. The smooth, effortless confidence was gone entirely, replaced by something careful and measured, the voice of someone who had learned, painfully and thoroughly, that his assumptions about the small colony beneath his fleet had been catastrophically wrong. "Meridian Station," he said. "This is Commander Vantor. I am requesting a temporary cessation of hostilities to discuss terms." Laura took the channel herself, standing tall, despite 4 sleepless days and the exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. "We are listening," she said simply. "You have caused significant damage to Dominion forces," Vantor said. "Damage that will require explanation to my superiors, explanation I did not anticipate needing when I arrived at this system less than a week ago." "You arrived expecting an easy conquest," Laura said. "You found something else instead." There was a long pause on the channel, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting to hear how the commander, who had once so casually erased 11 lives, would respond to that simple, unflinching truth. "Yes," Vantor finally admitted, "we did. We are not interested in continuing this conflict," Laura said, "but we are also not interested in surrendering. Meridian Station belongs to the people who built it. It will remain that way." Another pause, longer this time. When Vantor spoke again, his voice carried something I had never expected to hear from him, something that sounded almost like grudging respect buried beneath layers of wounded pride. "The Dominion does not typically withdraw from claimed territory," he said, "but the Dominion also does not typically encounter resistance capable of disabling a flagship and disrupting an entire reinforcement fleet's command structure within the span of a single week." "Then perhaps," Laura said, "it is time the Dominion learned something new." The negotiations that followed lasted nearly 6 hours, and I remained at my station throughout, translating every careful, cautious exchange between Laura Whitfield and Commander Vantor. In the end, the Austrian Dominion withdrew from the system entirely, unwilling to commit the additional resources that a genuine, prolonged conflict against a species willing to fight without limits would require, especially with reports already spreading, thanks to Corvain and their allies, of the first colony in 3 centuries to successfully resist Dominion expansion. I watched from the observation deck as the massive fleet finally departed, 25 ships pulling away from Meridian Station one by one, retreating into the dark distance from which they had come less than a week earlier. Laura stood beside me, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. But something else was there too, something steady and unbroken. "We did it," I said quietly, still barely able to believe the words as I spoke them. "We did," Laura agreed, "but this is not the end, Ashford. Word of what happened here is already spreading. Every species living under Dominion control now knows resistance is possible. The Austrun Dominion is not simply going to accept this loss quietly." I thought about the messages from Corvain and the other species who had reached out during those chaotic hours, about the quiet, hopeful possibility of alliances forming across systems that had spent generations believing resistance meant certain destruction. "Then we will be ready for whatever comes next," I said. "Together, if it comes to that." Laura nodded slowly, watching the last of the Austrun ships vanish into the darkness beyond our small, stubborn colony. "The galaxy did not expect humans to retaliate," she said quietly, "but I think they are beginning to understand what that mistake is going to cost them." Standing there on that observation deck, watching the stars settle back into their quiet, undisturbed patterns above Meridian Station, I thought about Peter and Alice Marsh, about the 11 people we had lost, about everything that had changed in the span of a single, impossible week. We had not asked for this fight. We had not wanted it, but when it arrived at our door, we had refused to kneel, and in doing so, we had taught the galaxy its very first lesson about the price of underestimating humanity. It would not be the last lesson we taught them, but it was, without question, the one they would remember longest, the moment an entire region of space learned, quickly and permanently, that humans do not break simply because someone bigger tells us to. We adapt, we endure, and when pushed far enough, we find a way to win. The stars above Meridian Station had never looked quieter, or more thoroughly, permanently ours.